Hello and welcome to Let's Be Honest with your host, Just Johnda. Tonight we have another Just Johnda's legal breakdown, also called Just Johnda's LBD, and we are going to get into some serious stuff tonight. So I am titling this week's legal series because there's going to be two episodes that cover this, maybe three, given what just happened with Eric Adams. But I am going to call this So You're Just Going to Play in Our Faces, because that's kind of what it feels like is going on out here in these legal streets. So the first one that we are going to get started with is related to the ongoing legal saga of Wendy Williams. Yes, we are talking Wendy Williams, the queen of daytime, and everything that is going on with her. So, if you all could bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to make sure that our friend over in the Fashion and Drama Diaries are following along as well, because they were waiting on this episode. So, we don't want to leave anybody out. So I am getting that going. And then we're just going to, and now we're just going to keep it moving. Okay. So our girl, Wendy, what is going on with that situation? Well, it keeps getting uglier and uglier. Nothing that she is doing wrong at all, but a case has been filed on Wendy's behalf by her guardian. And we know that the guardian has gotten a lot of flack for this case, but we are going to jump right into it. So I'm going to put the case up on screen so that you all can see it and follow along as I go through it. Now, this case has been brought in the state of New York. No, it's not the Southern District of New York where the other cases have been brought, because that, well, let's just say it's a mess. Okay, so we are going into, and this is being brought by Sabrina Morrissey. Sabrina Morrissey is the attorney who, is those of you, well, some of you may know, Sabrina Morrissey is the attorney on Wendy Williams's case. Now, I'm going to make myself smaller on this so that I can read it as I'm talking to you all about it. Okay, so this case, as I mentioned, was brought in the state of New York. You see the picture of Wendy up on the screen. It only gets sadder, folks. And I'm going to jump around because we dealt with this case before, and I was certainly very critical about how this situation unfolded. But of course, as we learn more information about Wendy's condition, while I still maintain my concerns about the fact that it was a bank that jumped in and decided that they were going to block her money, and then to cover their own behinds later filed a case against her in court, basically to put a guardianship in place. And by the way, they wanted to be the guardians as well. So I still take grave issue with that, because I definitely thought that there was some abusive behavior going on there. The more we learn about what was going on with Wendy Williams' condition, we know that there was help needed. It was a nasty way to get to where we ultimately needed to be. Okay, so Sabrina Morrissey acting in her capacity as the guardian for Wendy Williams. We know that the court appointed guardian was put into place after, just to give you a quick background, court appointed guardian was put into place for Wendy Williams. We're going to go back to, I believe it's the spring of 2023, and some of that's going to come up in the breakdown of this case. What happened is Wendy Williams and her team at the time went public with a complaint that Wells Fargo was blocking her ability to use her funds, whether it was to pay her bills or do anything. Welcome to all the people that are coming into the comments. Feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll try and keep an eye on it in between reading it, highlight your responses as well. So at any rate, Wendy Williams, so this started with a complaint that was actually filed by Wendy Williams and her team because Wells Fargo was blocking her ability to spend her money as she wished. And ultimately, what began to unfold from that was allegations that there was some mismanagement going on, whether it was by Wendy, whether it was by Wendy's people. There was definitely some concerns. Wells Fargo, specifically at the behest of the person who was her personal account manager, who had also been dismissed by Wendy Williams. Wells Fargo then filed an action in court, essentially to have a guardian. To have a guardian put in place for Ms. Williams. They were alleging that she was incompetent to deal with her own funds. So that is where we found ourselves as of the spring of 2023. I may be mistaken about this, but as we go through the case, it'll come up. There's been a lot of allegations against the guardian, and a lot of those allegations were brought by Wendy's family members, the dubious manager, which we'll get into, a jewelry seller turned manager. So there's been some oddness going on there. There's been allegations of misappropriation of funds, allegedly by the guardian. So this situation has gotten increasingly nasty, especially once this special, which is actually the subject of this suit, once the special came out and the family started to say, make even more allegations against the guardian, saying that Wendy was being kept away from them and all kinds of other things going on in the background. And we've also seen some strange appearances, and I'm not saying she appeared strange, I mean just odd appearances by Wendy Williams, whether she was with her son, and then of course some of the strange things that went on during the filming of this documentary, a lot of which we saw. So let's jump right into the case, and as we go through it, I will talk more about the law around this, as well as give you the benefit of my experience as a court-appointed guardian over the years for both juveniles and incapacitated adults in a variety of circumstances, because there is a lot of misinformation as it relates to guardians, especially after the Lifetime movie that came, I'm sorry, not Lifetime, the Netflix movie that came out a few years ago about this wicked guardian and what she was doing to the elderly wards that she had. I did a podcast episode about that as well, so I will link that episode in the comments so that you can watch that, and it will also give you again some corrected information about what really happens, the non-dramatized version. And of course, with everything going on with Wendy Williams, there's also been a lot of misinformation as it relates to the guardianship process in general. And let's not even get into the Britney Spears of it all, and how the guardianship system has been used. And if you listen to some of my previous episodes as it relates to Britney Spears and as it relates to Wendy Williams, when the Britney Spears case was going on, and also when the initial guardianship situation was going on with Wendy Williams, you will also know that I raised some questions about how these things are handled, particularly as it relates to women versus men, especially when it comes to how they spend their money and what they're doing with it. Let me check the comments just in case there's any questions. There doesn't seem to be, so let's jump right into it. Okay, so we have this case again being brought in New York. Sabrina Morrissey, she's been Wendy's guardian since the court appointed her several years ago. She is suing on the behalf of Wendy Williams, who, for the purposes of this suit, is called WHH. And the suit is against A&E Television Networks, who is the parent company of Lifetime Television, One Reality Productions, the producers, obviously, Creature Films, and Mark Ford. Mark Ford is going to come up a lot, just to tell you who he is. He is he's one of the producers, but he is also the owner of Creature Films. So all of these individuals were involved in the creation of that 4-night docuseries that we all saw, and many of us were horrified by, about Wendy Williams, that aired in February of 2024. So that's your plaintiff, the guardian, on the behalf of Wendy Williams. So it's not about her, against all of these individuals. So just jumping right in, you're going to see a lot blacked out in this document compared to some of the other documents. And that is because when someone is in guardianship, it's very similar to cases that I and other colleagues deal with related to children. These things are highly confidential because, again, you are dealing with someone who is considered to be a vulnerable adult, no different than a child. They are unable to consent to have, or deemed legally unable to consent to have personal information out there about themselves. So that is why there's going to be a lot of redactions on these documents that are public. So this was through Deadline. So this case arises from the brutally calculated, deliberate actions of powerful and cravenly opportunistic media companies working together with a producer to knowingly exploit WHH, which is Wendy Williams Hunter, an acclaimed African-American entertainer who tragically suffers from dementia and as a result has become cognitively impaired, permanently disabled, and legally incapacitated. Very strong language right out of the gate. That language is very important because that is already setting us up, and we're going to see more of that language as I go on. That is already setting us up for the cause of action. And in every cause of action, all three counts that come up in this case, all three of these counts are deemed to be deliberate. So because they are deemed to be deliberate, heinous, with a reckless disregard for her health, the language that is used is going to be very strong to continuously highlight at every turn that everyone involved in this had bad intentions as it relates to Wendy Williams. And by the way, just in case you're wondering, this case was previously filed immediately after the case came up. However, what Wendy Williams and her I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. This was filed immediately when the special aired. However, as more discovery has come about, the case was amended, and her attorney, in fact, who is her guardian, added additional information to it as she continued to uncover more facts or more allegations, which we'll hear about in this case. Okay. And like I said, we're going to skip around a little bit, but there's a lot of good stuff here, a lot of interesting stuff, really. So, eager to sensationalize and profit from WWH's cognitive and physical decline, defendants took advantage of WHH in the cruelest, most obscene way possible for their own financial gain, in a manner that truly shocks the conscience. Defendants created and published a stomach-turning four-part documentary entitled Where is Wendy Williams? And it's going to be called The Program a lot. I actually agree with everything about that sentence. I watched that special, and I'm sure a lot of you did too. And it was awful. It was hard to watch. I ended up having to record it because I couldn't do it in one sitting. It was truly, truly terrible. So now this is where we get into the meat and potatoes of these allegations, and it's going to come up again and again. She's saying this documentary was filmed without a valid contract. That's huge. So remember that. And released without the guardian's consent. Those two things are huge, and they're going to keep coming up. As is patently obvious from the very first few minutes of the program itself, Wendy Williams Hunter was highly vulnerable and clearly incapable of consenting to being filmed, much less humiliated and exploited. When the Guardian discovered the defendant's true intentions were to portray Wendy in a highly demeaning and embarrassing manner, she immediately sought to protect her ward and to preserve her dignity. But defendants fought to move ahead and release the program over the weekend of February 24th and 25th. Not surprisingly, the public reacted with disgust and revulsion at defendants' blatant and vicious exploitation of WWH by willfully taking advantage of a severely impaired, incapacitated person. Defendants have made millions while she received a paltry $82,000. And I do believe that she has a great argument for the millions when you consider how huge the viewership from this was. I'll jump ahead and just say that the viewership of this is estimated to be about 6 million views between the views on Lifetime itself, as well as subsequent screens, which made it one of the most successful specials or shows that Lifetime has done in recent years. Now, going back a bit, she gets into how we got here. So I'm not going to drag it on too long. I'm going to skip ahead. The bottom line is the next section. She gives the history of Wendy's career, or a brief history, because Wendy has had quite a long and storied career. She has been... she has had a career that spanned over 30 years. We know that she started out as a broadcaster on the radio, but she also did other things. She had her highly successful show from 2008 to 2021. We know that that show was so incredibly successful, in fact, that the company that owned it tried everything they could to prolong it before ultimately canceling it by bringing on guests who were there for extended periods of time. We remember when Nick Cannon was on there, Bateman, I forget his first name, but Jason Bateman did it. A whole bunch of folks did it. Of course, Sherry Shepherd did it briefly, and ultimately when the show went off the air, Sherry Shepherd ended up getting a show in that time slot. So they talked about how Wendy was known for her appearance, her trademark wig. She loved the jewelry. She loved the clothes. She's had the plastic surgery. She's gone up, down, in and out. And we've seen Wendy at many phases. And we've also known Wendy to be very candid, even about the things that she was going on in her own life, including her struggles with substance abuse. And of course, her classic, "How you doing?" Okay, or it wasn't, "How you doing?" I'm not that great at it. My daughter used to be fabulous at it. Okay, now, in or around January 2019, in the wake of the devastating public news that her then husband and business partner had fathered a child with another woman, she took a 6-week leave from television and reportedly went to seek care in a rehabilitation facility. Even once she came back, it was fairly obvious even if no one ever said it, that she was physically in decline, and the rumors were bad at that point. And we know that she fainted that time on Halloween, that there were rumors about erratic behavior. Um, she just seemed to have a lot of issues. In fact, even the press was speculating that something was wrong with her cognitively and questioning whether or not it could be dementia related. But of course, Wendy was a woman at the time. I guess she was in her 50s. No one really thought, I mean, it was speculated, but it seemed a bit implausible. But things kept getting worse and worse. And during COVID, when she was doing those shows at home, it was pretty bad. I mean, I'm not even a daily watcher, and the things that I would see even online, it was pretty bad. By the fall of 2021, she was no longer able to appear on the show. And again, they continued to stretch it out. Remember, that was that last fall when people were coming back to their shows. COVID was still going on, but people were trying to slowly shift, if not fully back into the studios, just get something going, because I mean, we had all been home for almost a year and a half at that point. And as we know, they kept saying, no, she's coming, she's coming, she's coming. And it didn't happen. And by February 2022, her show was permanently canceled. And again, cognitive impairment was one of the things that was blamed. But as we know, Wendy also has Graves' disease as well. So now it gets into something that was not announced at the time, but is going to figure key in this lawsuit. Now, behind closed doors, in May 2023, Wendy was diagnosed by doctors at Weill Cornell Medical Center with frontal temporal lobe dementia, FTD, which is going to come up, and primary progressive aphasia. It is cruel, debilitating, and a progressive neuro disease, both of them actually, that result in significant and readily apparent behavioral changes, and it does gradually rob their victims of the ability to communicate at all. Thankfully, that part hasn't happened to Wendy, but it's a really cruel disease. In fact, FTD often significantly shortens a person's life. And Wendy right now is 60. So we're going to pray that that is not one of the things that happened to her. Okay, so 2022 is when the Wells Fargo thing happened. Okay, so I'm saying 2023. I thought that was wrong. So the guardianship piece, I'm going to shift quickly through this because I'm going to get into the law a little bit about this. And so the bottom line is, as we know, in January 2022, that is when the Wells Fargo piece happened. And if you look back again, I'm going to put some links in the comments. I did podcast episodes of that, which are now up here on YouTube as well. I did podcast episodes about those proceedings while they were going on. So I won't drag it out. This part of the case, which is very important because the Guardian is laying out the case for the judge. So there's pages of this. I'm just going to paraphrase. Bottom line is, as I said earlier, Wells Fargo allegedly, because of their concern for her welfare, made it difficult for Wendy to access her accounts. Essentially, they shut her down. She couldn't get her money. Ultimately, they reported it and really, they didn't report it per se. Wendy sued. And at that point, as she admits here, they took the extraordinary and highly unusual step of initiating a guardianship proceeding on its own in the Supreme Court of New York County, pursuant to Article 81 of the mental hygiene law. And they asked the court to appoint an independent guardian. So I'm going to touch on that a bit, just so that you all understand what that is when we get into that. Okay, there's a whole lot going on with my computer screen, so just bear with me. Okay, so the bottom line is that law allows that law allows for someone, a lot of times it's family members and others, but it could be brought by others, but you see it often with family members. I get people that call me about this as well, especially when you're dealing with and I tend to get called about these a lot, regular everyday practice. When there are people who were incapacitated children and they, progress through their teens and become an adult. And then at that point, the family wants to make sure that there are proper safeguards in place so that they can do what they need to do for their now adult. And so, what they wanted to do, especially in this case, was to make sure that her financial that her financial well-being was taken care of. At least that's what the court was concerned about. Wells Fargo, I'm still side-eyeing you. Unfortunately, despite the fact that these types of proceedings are supposed to be confidential, as I mentioned earlier, the proceeding was leaked to the media. As we know, Wendy's people did that because Wendy herself came out in a series of videos online and talked about the fact that her money was essentially, as far as she was concerned, being stolen from her. And I understand why she felt that way, given the way the situation was playing out. So at that point, there was a financial advisor put in place, and that person was revealed. They were subjected to extreme online abuse and bullying and alleged even threats to their life, and by people claiming to be her fans. Even her family was threatened. The situation became so bad that Wells Fargo allegedly hired personal security for that person. Now, there was an individual who was allegedly her who was there was an individual, we're going to get into this a little bit later. There was a person who was allegedly her manager, but they were kind of shifted to the side fairly early on in this process, because you would hear these different names and then they sort of went away and you started hearing about this Will Selby character. So let's get into him. Up until her diagnoses, and these are the two diagnoses that came in 2023, so pretty much a full year after the whole guardianship proceedings, because the guardianship situation, it's the messiness of it all started around February of March, because they locked up her accounts right after the holidays in 2022 in January. Proceedings were subsequently filed by Wells Fargo. The financial guardian was put into place around May. And then when they went back to court in July, that is when the court put a permanent guardian in place. And we'll get into the powers of that a little bit later, because that's going to be very important as it relates to this, this contract. Suffice it to say that none of those individuals, whether it was the Wells Fargo people or the person who filed this case, none of those individuals was Will Selby. So, up until her diagnoses, Wendy continued to live in her Manhattan apartment to provide her with normalcy and autonomy. Because again, when these guardianship pieces go into place, yes, the court wants certain safeguards regarding her finances, because that's what her guardianship was primarily about. It really wasn't dealing with health at that time. So at that point, the court and the guardian were supposed to follow what are typically the guardianship rules, which is to allow the person to exist in the with the guardianship in place with the least restrictive means possible to allow this adult, because we are talking about an adult, to continue to live their lives. Okay, so she was living there. She did have various specialists. And because she had been living in the New York and in the North Jersey area, for the most part, all of her specialists were pretty much in that area. So they were dealing with her various ailments. She had a home health caregiver. Sometimes her behavior was erratic, but she seemed to, as we know, she had Kevin Jr. that would come back and forth, etc. They did say she would regularly discard items in the apartment, including her personal property and food items. But again, it's her stuff, her money. She could do it. So after the guardian was appointed, Will Selby, a jeweler and social media personality that none of us had ever heard of, began to hold himself out as her new manager. Where'd it come from? Because again, there was other individuals when this whole thing first started, but now we have this Will Selby character. He's her new manager. And we remember, right? Because there was all of this stuff that was being put out. People were reporting it. Even some of my favorite YouTubers and podcasters that I follow were all hyped, talking about this new podcast Wendy was going to have. She was going to set the world ablaze. She was going to shut it all down because Wendy Williams was coming out with this podcast. And they even created this promotional website and Instagram page that was getting traction. It was a whole thing about Wendy, this podcast. It was all coming. So in or about the summer of 2022, defendants E1, Creature Films, and Mark Ford began to produce a reality television show about Wendy to air on Lifetime Network. So again, this is all going down within barely months of a guardian being put in place to deal with her finances, and a guardian who, as we know from you all being the smarties who listened when I talked about this before, a guardianship that meant that all of her financial decisions had to be reviewed. Her personal life was hers. This wasn't a global guardianship like Britney Spears. This was regarding her finances, and anything involving your finances is certainly going to involve your transactions in and out, and certainly contracts. But she had this manager. And even if an argument was to be put in place that, well, no, the manager could make some contracts on her behalf at that point, even if we were to concede that, because the guardianship was still a bit limited, as this situation goes on and more contracts are being filed and filming is to take place, you see where the guardian's argument gets better and better about how this whole thing unfolded as it relates to what her role was supposed to be in contract review and approval and which we're going to get into. And again, this woman is sick at that point, not even diagnosed, but you knew something wasn't right, and a guardian was appointed. But you still, okay, so just so we're all on the same page. Messy, messy, messy. In response to concerns expressed by the guardian, because the guardian did say, hey, stop the bus. Something is not right here. We still have not quite figured out how we even got here, because that's a major question. If a guardian is put in place, whether you think she should be in place or not, and on top of it, the person acting a little different, shouldn't we still be investigating how we even got here, even if the reason you're investigating it is so that we can get rid of the guardian? So, in response to concerns expressed, Selby told The Guardian that the program would focus on Wendy's triumphant return to media as she embarked on the new podcast venture. The producers wouldn't exploit her. They would only portray her in a positive light. And at the end of the day, if all else fails, he had full creative control. So with full creative control, if I don't want it in the film, it's not going in the film. Okay. During the filming, similar representations were made to her court appointed attorney because she didn't just have a guardian, there's an attorney involved as well. And E1's attorneys were telling the court appointed attorneys every time, making the same representations, that she was going to be portrayed in a positive manner. And all of that was, as they say, and I love this word, induce. It was intended to induce Wendy's participation in the show and assuage the Guardian's justifiable concerns. Inducement is important, especially when we are talking about fraud, because one of the counts in this action that the Guardian is bringing against Lifetime, A&E, and the production companies is fraud. And inducement to fraud is very important. So whenever you hear that word, it's very, very important. But inducement, coercion, those are the types of things that are important when you're saying that someone did something fraudulently to you or led you to, in this case, led to someone's participation or willingness to go along with something or sign a contract. How did you get to that point? Well, there was fraud in the inducement. They lied to me, and them lying to me allowed me to put my guard down. Them lying to me made me feel like it was okay to allow XYZ going on, or allowed, and in this case, them lying to Wendy also allowed her to continue to participate or induced her to. Beginning in or about August 2022, over a period of a few days, Selby facilitated the defendant's access to Wendy Williams, Hunter, mostly at her private residence, in order for them to film her. I have a question here, and it's going to continue to come up, but I suppose as this goes to court, maybe we'll learn more, because I am questioning why Selby isn't being sued here, but maybe there'll be a separate action against him. I don't know, but given his role as the facilitator, I do find it a little surprising that he is not being sued within the context of this suit as well. On August 17th, The Hollywood Reporter published an article saying that insiders had witnessed disturbing incidents during filming in 2021, where she was incoherent and production had to be abruptly cut off after mere minutes. When they're talking 2021, they're talking about during the Wendy Williams show. And they also talk about that article, which some of us remember. They talked about her... that she had nonlinear speech, brain fog, memory loss, even hallucinations. And again, there were times on the show where Wendy would literally go blank. You wondered if she knew that she was even there, let alone whether or not she knew who she was talking to. So let's see. So next, let's go. So we're going to skip down to the contract. Now, this is really weird. And for those who are watching on YouTube, look closely at this. I looked at it last night, and we know that analysis of handwriting has been basically debunked mostly in courts as junk science. But if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck. And when you look at this, I mean, come on. Even if we are to assume that Wendy printed her signature because she was in a state of impairment, so she wasn't doing her fancy W's and Y's and all of that. The thing is, if there was an impairment that changed the way that she was writing, even and now she wanted to print, you would assume that it would not be this neat. This is just neat bubble handwriting that's nothing like what is purported to be her normal signature. But again, not an expert in a science that's considered to be. At any rate, not before, but after filming began. Defendant E1 had the assistant and input an input of defendants Ford, Creature Films, and A&E, and they eventually drafted a one-sided on-camera talent agreement, and that's a contract. Because at that point, they had already, so now we're finding out that they had already been filming her, Will Selby. Now, who knows what kind of arrangement he had going on with them? I suspect a monetary one, but that's just my suspicions. Allegedly. Shout out to my boy Alex Rogers. They are claiming that there was no contract. Will Selby was just providing access to Miss Wendy, but no contract. So instead, they put one in place, one-sided, in an attempt to legitimize it. They submitted it to her after she had already been filmed. Apparently, she was disheveled, not mentally present, confused. No person who witnessed her in those circumstances could possibly believe that she was capable of consenting. Now, I don't know who saw her sign it, but maybe they're just talking about her overall condition during that time period. The contract was executed on January 25th, 2023 by the Wendy Experience Incorporated, an entity controlled by Selby. The contract also bears a printed, not cursive signature purporting to be Williams. Very interesting, because the contract was executed by Selby, but had Wendy's, or controlled by Selby, but had Wendy's signature. Apart from the signature, there's no evidence that she signed the contract. But this is an important piece. No evidence that the guardian saw it and signed off on it as well, which she gets into later on. Pursuant to the contract, she agreed the Wendy Experience Incorporated, so this is Selby, agreed to lend her services to E1 for the filming of a reality television show starring Wendy. The contract further provides that Wendy will be credited as an executive producer for the program, a fact that the defendants have relied on, implying that she endorsed it. And this comes up during the appeal. Although defendants were well aware that a guardian had been appointed for her, especially as it relates to financials, which spills into business. Because if we're concerned about how you spend your money, then how you conduct yourself business-wise, because that could impact your money. It could impact your financial estate. The guardian should be aware of that. So they knew it. And this was highly publicized everywhere. Remember, the guardianship had been put in place in 2022. The guardian was not involved in the creation of the program or the contract and was not shown a copy of the contract until months after it was purportedly executed. And pretty much when she was like, what is this BS you all are doing? Indeed, none of the defendants ever gained the guardian's consent for Wendy's participation in the film, and there was no way that she could have consented, as she was incapacitated prior to and during the filming. Pursuant to orders issued by the court in the guardianship proceedings, the guardian was not permitted to discuss Wendy with the defendants. She explained this to Selby. The guardian also told Selby that she and perhaps even the justice in the guardianship would need to see and approve the final product before it could air. Needless to say, that didn't happen. Now, Discovery of the contract. Guardian discovered the contract in March, so around 3 weeks after it was executed. March 14, 2023, she learned of the contract, and the court-appointed attorney stepped in as well and spoke to counsel for the first time and explained that she wasn't in a position, she as in Wendy Williams, wasn't in a position to consent to the contract and that it would need to be amended before it could be approved by the Guardian. On 2 phone calls on March 14th and 15th, 2023, E1's in-house attorneys, Jada Jones and Blossom LaForte, assured Wendy Williams' court-appointed attorney that no footage of Wendy Williams would be used or released unless and until an agreement could be reached and approved by the Guardian, and that the final product would portray her comeback and show her in a positive light. So again, we're setting up the fraud case. We see the inducement. No, it's fine. It's fine. This contract is legit. We're going to make sure that you see it. Everything is all about the comeback. We want the world to see the amazing Wendy. The Guardian didn't try to stop the filming because she was actively misled. Okay, so now we know this is the part the Guardian's got to cover her own butt. She was actively misled about the defendant's activities and treatment of Wendy and was unaware of the damaging way that Mr. Ford, his crew, and the remaining defendants were filming Wendy. Now, I know that everybody's giving the Guardian a lot of flack, and even on this, people, because they are so anti-Guardian and anti-Guardian for her, even on this part, I know that people will say, well, why did she allow it? We have to remember at this point, the guardianship is still based on the financial stuff. And at this point, the Guardian is still trying to have sort of that hands-on, hands-off piece where your guardianship needs to allow the person the autonomy of being an adult. The guardianship needs to allow the person to not be so overly restricted unless they're seen to be a danger to themselves. And again, because of the way the order is actually written, which I went over back in 2022, it was supposed to be about her financial well-being. Now, yes, her physical well-being was going to play into that, especially if there seemed to be ongoing cognitive decline, but she was also being seen by doctors. So if I am the Guardian and I know that, yes, I need to keep an eye on some of the cognitive stuff, but primarily my role is to deal with the financials of it all. And if I am following the law and I am still supposed to kind of step back as it relates to anything that does not relate to spending or financial decisions, which technically the comings and goings every day of her and her manager and trying to make a comeback, that wouldn't, those, as a Guardian, I would not have been integrally involved in all of that. The only way that the Guardian would have been fully hands-on involved in that piece would have been if she was able to get an injunction to stop it, and then she had wind of the fact that they were continuing to do it. So of course, at that point, she would have been more hands-on, jumping in, getting the court involved, saying that my ward is being exploited by these individuals trying to film her, despite the fact that I have put the kibosh on it because the court has given me approval to do that. That's not where they were at this point. And that's why the dates are very important, especially when people start making accusations about what the Guardian did or didn't do. I am not saying that this Guardian was doing a good job, a bad job, or anything in between. I am simply talking about the law as it relates to the Guardian's position at different points in time. And of course, given other cases that have gone on, most notably the Britney Spears case, I think that sometimes what was done in the Wendy Williams case, at least in the beginning, because we know that things are different now. What was done in the Wendy Williams case in the beginning, in that first year or so of the guardianship, gets conflated with what we know to be the guardianship as it relates to Britney Spears, which was a full guardianship of her person. I referred to it earlier as a global guardianship, but it essentially is. It is of her person. That means everything about her, not just her money, but how she lived, where she went. Like Britney tearfully told the court in one of those hearings when she was in the process of getting out of the guardianship, they were involved in, had the ability to be involved in every aspect of her life, right down to when she traveled to see her kids, where she went, right down to the type of birth control she took, medication, whether or not she took medication, forcing her to or not to, all of those things. That is not where the Wendy Williams guardianship was in these earlier stages, which of course allowed for abuses by essentially anyone. And arguably in this case, the argument is that the abuses took place by the individuals, all of the defendants collectively associated with this special or this documentary, also facilitated by Will Selby, who was representing himself as management and the person who was basically in charge of her image, I suppose, because of him running this so-called Wendy Williams experience. So just wanted to jump in on that while we talked about that. And by the way, the Guardian was texted great pictures of Wendy, so they knew exactly what to do. These pictures of Wendy are great. You know, this is the way that she liked to portray herself. Fabulous. She is at Wendy Williams' way, showing off this great honor, cool car. She's wearing the types of clothes she liked to wear with the fur and all of that. So it may have felt a bit unsavory to the Guardian that this was going on, but at the same time, the individuals around it seem to know just what to do. And this is also a nice picture of Wendy. She's sitting in her home, and again, she's got on a good wig, and she's got on the fluffy shoes, you know, all the things she liked to do. So, and all of these things were portrayed as a positive influence. A positive experience for Wendy, and that it would go towards the leading up to the podcast. And indeed, she even says in paragraph 34, no one viewing the images would have possibly imagined what Mr. Ford and his crew were really planning or what the finished product would be. And of course, we saw that. In between, they did tell her they wanted to film her meeting with her elderly father. No discussion took place of her filming with other relatives. She did agree in consent to her visiting him with her father, but all of this other stuff or other family members being filmed, being part of the project, none of that was ever discussed with her. So now things start to, the train leaves the station. In May 2023, immediately after Wendy was diagnosed with the debilitating diseases that we talked about earlier, FTD and PPA, she began to receive 24/7 care in a protected environment. So, of course, at that point, they didn't have any access to film with her, and repeatedly saw additional footage. The Guardian was like, absolutely not. We're declining all requests for interviews, filming, all of that. So months and months passed. So, of course, this is also part of as we know, individuals claiming that they had no access to Wendy. The thing that it appears to me, excuse me, that if this is to be believed, part of why they had no access was that she was getting 24/7 treatment in a protected environment due to her decline. Now, I'm not saying that no one, including the individuals, particularly the individuals who we know she had a close relationship with, like her niece, shouldn't have been allowed to see her and spend time with her. Again, just putting into perspective the calendar of what we are learning based on this current proceeding. And putting that into context with the allegations from friends and family and those others who claim to be in the know about what was going on at that time. There were things that were being said that lent itself to big, big, big allegations without additional context to what was going on. It was like, oh, well, she's not well, but not that she literally had a debilitating disease. And we know that that's not what was said because that came in a big announcement later in February. So as the months passed, the Guardian, between 2023, when she cut off their access to Wendy from May 2023 until early 2024, she assumed that the project was defunct. Can't get any more footage. Contract was never finalized. You never showed me any footage. We're not focusing on a podcast or her career, which is what this was all supposed to be about. So, it's all gone. And we know people film for reality shows and documentaries and series all the time, and it never goes anywhere just because you're trying to sell it or what have you. Now, of course, we know that Lifetime has had a bit of a long-standing relationship with Wendy Williams. She's done several things for them, including her own movie, not this documentary or movie that was out several years ago, as well as her hosting several shows on there. So she definitely had a relationship with Lifetime, the parent company A&E, which makes this even more, I'm just going to call it shitty. On or about February 2nd, 2024, without any notice whatsoever to the Guardian, A&E released a salacious promotional trailer for the program and announced that it would air on Lifetime Networks in 2 segments on February 24th and 25th. So we remember the trailer, and it was awful because most people, we were all like, I hate to watch it, but I feel like I have to because this looks crazy. The trailer presented her tragic decline as an entertainment spectacle, opening with scenes from her at the height of her career and then other scenes where she was yelling at people and saying at one point, I have no idea where we are. And the obvious purpose of the trailer was to invite the audience to gawk at Wendy's cognitive and physical decline. Of course it was. The trailer was put out there absolutely as train wreck TV. And however you may feel about Wendy Williams and her career and all of that, and some people say karma and all of those things, even if you feel that way about Wendy and say based on the stuff that she's done in relation to other people, she had it coming. Wouldn't that be if the person knew it? So you could say, ha ha, gotcha, I'm sticking it to you. Well, if you're going to stick it to somebody, make sure they know about it when you're sticking it to them. Don't think that it's okay to stick it to someone when they may or may not even know what's going on. You're angry with a ghost. The obvious purpose of the trailer. Okay, so we talked about that. And even some of the media picked up on it. Los Angeles Times said Wendy Williams is shown inebriated, struggling to stand, tearful, and seemingly suffering memory loss, all while insisting to friends and family she is of sound mind. So even the trailer had the media upset with what was going on. Okay, I see someone in the comments is talking about Diddy. We are definitely going to get to that. And yes, he did give hints when he gave interviews. Okay, so um, prior to his release, defendants had been informed by her family members that she was diagnosed with dementia. No mention of her cognitive condition was made in the trailer or any other marketing materials. Instead, the program portrayed her as a laughingstock. Unflattering pictures and footage of her, including photographs of her in a wheelchair with her legs spread, were dredged up and widely publicized. Yeah, I mean, I don't have to get, spell out chapter and verse. We saw it. It was bad. They claimed it was executive produced by her and suggested, among other inaccurate things, her approval of the final product. That was a blatant lie. Wendy never even saw either the trailer or the program before they aired, much less endorsed them. And even if she did, given her condition both on and off the program, would she even know? The Guardian was completely shocked and horrified by the trailer, which flew in the face of of defendants' assurances that she would be treated with dignity and respect. And on February 22nd, so this is a couple of days before, the Guardian sought and obtained an ex parte temporary restraining order from the Commercial Division of New York State. The Guardian affirmed under oath that she lacked the capacity to consent, and she was diagnosed with FTD and PPA in May 2023. The Guardian never approved the contract. She also obtained a court order temporarily sealing the action in light of the court orders sealing the guardianship proceeding to safeguard her financial and health information. Within hours of being served, copies of the TRO's motion papers were leaked to multiple press outlets, and we know who did that. It definitely wasn't the Guardian. We know exactly who did that. If it wasn't Will Selby, it was the individuals associated with the production company. Wouldn't put it past a few family members as well. That same day, her care team issued a press release publicly announcing her diagnosis. At that point, they felt it was important and it was in her best interest for the public to know. Still personal, but given what had been put out there about her, you kind of had to counter it that she's not, out of her mind or whatever. This impacts her image. And granted, even if she doesn't work again, she has a carefully cultivated image and she has a right to protect it. Defendant A&E and E1 then moved the appellate division for an order vacating the TRO on First Amendment grounds. And on February 23rd, the appellate division vacated the TRO as impermissible prior restraint on speech, allowing the program to be aired without being reviewed first by the guardian or the justice in the guardianship proceeding. The ruling did not address the merits of the guardian's assertion that Wendy lacked capacity to consent to the contract. It did not address those things because they knew if those things had been addressed, that TRO should have stood. To have this woman exploited and abused and say that there was an interest on First Amendment grounds, who stood to gain from this? You have an individual who is simply not being protected, no matter who you think they are, public figure or not. There was no overriding public interest in this at all. What was newsworthy about it? It was gossip. Yes, gossip no different than the stuff that she did on her show. But there's a critical difference here. This person was incapacitated, and I truly believe that that is why the appellate court did not address it. Because then you have to justify why it's okay that this person be portrayed in this manner, why it is okay. Forget her portrayal, forget all of that. Why it is okay for an individual's image to be used at all if there was no contract in place. No contract no consent. And moreover, the individuals who would have needed to consent to it and needed to sign the contracts were left out of the process altogether. Is it messy? Yes. Because again, the Selby person and all of that should have never been allowed to be involved, given the situation with the guardianship, whether it, even when it was a limited financial guardianship, there should have been more controls as it relates to the management, because that still would have involved her financial well-being. But certainly, once it was clear that she was incapacitated, especially when that was done within 2 months of the contract that's kind of not a contract, come on. So the program was released. And just want to give this piece. In a recent interview, Lifetime executive Bree Miranda Bryant inexplicably claimed defendants were unaware of Wendy's dementia diagnosis when they began the project. But in the same interview, she admitted that defendants had learned of it in the first 2 hours. But they proceeded to film her and then air it. So, okay, girl. And see, sometimes you just need to shut up. The images were awful. We know. I'm just gonna zip past some of these in case you don't recall. And these were actually put into the lawsuit. So Lifetime, I didn't get them from you all. These are images that the Guardian actually put into the lawsuit. And it said, in an utterly depraved moment, defendants A&E and Lifetime shamelessly attempted to promote this fiasco as part of Lifetime's celebration of Black History Month, airing an earlier documentary and television movie featuring Wendy in the lead up to the program's release with the banner, "Join Lifetime in celebrating Black History Month every day." Yeah, that was gross. I remember that. It should have been abundantly clear to anyone present during the film. And I mean, we know that. And of course, there was a lot of negative press about it. Even the Daily Mail. And if the Daily Mail says it all feels gross, you know it's in bad shape. Colander, it's beyond disappointing that not one person on Lifetime's network production or distribution team realized the disservice being done to Wendy. BET, if hell is real, I have some nominees who belong in one or more of his 7 circles. It only took me 1 minute of watching Lifetime's Where's Wendy Williams to know it didn't belong on television. The Guardian, the capturing of Wendy Williams like this, Where is Wendy Williams, is doing the very thing it purports to be exposing, exploiting a declining star and turning her pain into profit. And there's many, many, many more. So, I mean, it was just ridiculous. This is all cynical and desperate, regardless of what and this is what the suit says. Regardless of what the Guardian knew and when, if defendant Ford, his crew, and the remaining defendants were genuinely worried about Wendy's well-being and safety, they easily could have done what Wells Fargo did, which was to stop the exploitation. Instead, they kept filming, trolling for the most embarrassing and shocking footage to titillate and sell to their audiences in order to generate more profit. I'm inclined to agree. So, of course, we give jurisdiction, venue. They have it. It's in New York. Wendy was in New York most of the time. Everything was filmed in New York. The guardianship is in New York. And of course, it was distributed everywhere. She goes through the background. So that was the factual overview of the case. So I'm going to jump ahead because a lot of this is repetitive. Good stuff. You could go and read it, but still repetitive. It talks more about the disease that she has, the release of the program, but we're going to jump ahead to the counts because at the cause of action. So the first cause of action, they won a declaratory judgment against E1 and A&E. And essentially, what that means is they want the contract and everything about it nullified. The special pulled can't be used in any way at all. So a judgment against them, um, period. And that the order, and she again mentions that the order was widely known. It was widely reported. She talks about her diagnosis and the fact that it was obvious. Uh, we know that they claim to be in possession of the contract that binds her to the agreement. She's saying, no, ma'am. The contract is dated November 22nd, was purported November 2022, was purportedly executed on January 25th, with amendments allegedly signed on February 17th, and an additional amendment prepared in March 2023. The Guardian was not involved in the contract, the creation of the entity, the Wendy Williams experience, or any of that. So this part is all about the contract, which means you throw the contract out, you throw everything out with it. So because she did not sign the contract and at all relevant times was incapable of consenting to the contract, and because neither the guardian nor the court appointed guardianship proceeding approved the contract should be declared null and void and of no effect. So this goes away. You get nothing. You pull the special. Your special doesn't exist. Next, second cause of action, unjust enrichment of all of the defendants. The bottom line is she's alleging the defendants enriched themselves at Wendy's expense, gave her maybe $82,000, and who knows what of that actually went into her bank account, since this Selby person is supposedly her manager. Did it get paid to the Wendy Williams experience? Who the freak knows? But the bottom line is this thing got millions and millions of views, and they're even using it again now because they brought the public's attention to it by using this Wendy Williams special. And now they're even doing another project, which is probably going to be a huge dig at this Guardian, called The Bad Guardian, which is coming up soon. And they're so gross. They're literally using some of the stuff from the Wendy Williams documentary as the promotional materials for Bad Guardian. So so their enrichment has definitely been at their expense. She doesn't have the metrics here, but the bottom line is it's been seen by millions. They used her labor, they exploited her incapacity, they fraudulently claimed that this special was going to be about something that it totally wasn't about. They didn't even let the audience know that she was ill. It was mentioned sort of anecdotally by a family member towards the end of that. And all of this is in the suit as well. I've read it twice, so I'm just paraphrasing. And so further discovery, and she's correct, further discovery will need to be required to quantify defendants' unjust enrichment and an appropriate amount of restitution for Wendy. And as the case goes on, as long as this continues and doesn't get thrown out, there will be discovery, and these entities will have to reveal what did you make on it? What was the streaming money? What was the direct show money? This is now available not only to be watched, but to be purchased. So what did you make on it? What did you make on it? What advertising did you sell while it was shown? All of that. Third cause of action, the false endorsement under the Lanham Act. And the bottom line is it is any person who, in connection with any goods or services, and I'm going to read it, paraphrasing it a bit, uses any name, the false designation of origin, false or misleading description, or false or misleading representation of fact, which is likely to cause confusion or cause mistake, or to deceive as to the affiliation, connection, or association of such person with another person, or as to the origin, sponsorship, approval of his or her goods. So the bottom line is, she's saying that in connection with the program, they made false and misleading representations, suggesting that Wendy Williams produced it, agreed to it, approved to this depiction of her, and that they were made in commerce and in connection with goods and services. So, in making these false, basically these false representations regarding the fact that Wendy signed the contract, the fact that Wendy endorsed this program, that she was knowingly, mentally present and involved in this program, it allowed the program to be promoted. It allowed the public to then come and engage, although we know that people like train wrecks, so they would have watched it anyway. But that it convinced people to watch the program. It convinced other people to carry this program. Because if people knew, although I don't know if I buy it, but allegedly, if people knew, it's possibly likely that the level of sponsorships, any commercialization of it, all of that would have potentially not taken place if people knew that the whole setup behind the scenes for this was fraud. And of course, you have the commerce piece, because all of this was done to sell this product. And of course, she says defendants continue to promote the false narrative even after the Guardian sought to enjoin the release of the program on the grounds that Wendy didn't consent to it or approve of it. And of course, they claim that she did, which allowed the court to then try to hang its hat on that whole First Amendment piece. This is harmful. And she's right. It's harmful to Wendy's reputation for the public and the entertainment industry to believe that she would executive produce, approve, or authorize the release of such a demeaning depiction of herself. And I think most of us, when you watched it, most people knew, but it's unfortunate because, of course, it was exploitive and it allowed, ethical questions. And then she talks about that. It allowed for them to avoid the ethical questions and the public backlash if they could say, well, no, Wendy was good with it. When Wendy was with it, she knew what was going on the whole time. And so she says that as a result of defendants' misrepresentations, because you always got to say that there was a loss in the fraud, Wendy has suffered substantial damages in the form of irreparable harm to her reputation and earnings potential. I believe that. Fourth cause of action, fraud. Just fraud across the board. And we've kind of talked around that in a number of ways. Fraud in the inducement with the contract and having people allegedly who should have been watching potentially back off. Fraud as it relates to third parties believing that this is a legit project. Fraud even when they went to court to get the injunction removed. But one of the biggest ones, obviously, and she brought up again and again, fraud, because there were individuals, including Wendy, but the Guardian on behalf of Wendy, because the Guardian is acting as Wendy, reasonably relied on their representations that this was going to be a positive depiction of Wendy. And it simply was not. And that is terribly, terribly sad and unfortunate. So talk about the defendant's release of the program, and it caused her to suffer injury, loss, and damage due to the embarrassing, harmful, degrading, and untruthful depictions of her. The relief that they are looking for, of course, declare the contract null and void, an award of compensatory damages, punitive damages. That means punishment, people. Compensatory, of course, is what she should have gotten, her actual losses. And an order requiring them to disgorge and pay to Wendy all proceeds received in connection with the program. So disgorge, that means you give it up. You vomit up everything you've made and you give it to her. An injunction permanently enjoining them from any further airing, sales, or release of the program. So destroy it, burn it, never want to see it again. Attorneys' fees and costs, and such other relief as the court deems just and proper. Um, I think those are the perfect things to ask for. And by the way, this filed again, Sabrina Morrissey acting on uh, in her capacity as Wendy's guardian. So essentially, it's like Wendy suing, but I'm suing for her. Um, I think those are absolutely the right things to ask for if the court sees her point of view. We went a little over, so I'm going to end this episode, and I'm going to come right back and do a separate one as it relates to Diddy, because it's so much information. At any rate, I think this was the right way to handle this. I really do. I think that, given the nature and circumstances of how this all went down, the guardian is well within her rights to file this. I think that now, whether or not she'll win, I don't know, but it was absolutely the right thing to do, because otherwise Wendy is not protected. She wasn't protected through this entire process anyway. But at this point, if you are acting as her guardian, you have no choice but to step your game up and say, look, I tried and I am continuing to try to do right by this woman. I've tried and I'm continuing to try to stop the bleed, as in not have this continue to be shown, get it wiped from the face of the earth in as much as you can, because it's still going to be out there. But at the very least, get my client as much money as she can get from it, from the individuals who raked her over the coals with this special. In her position, I absolutely would have filed it. And by the way, she didn't wait until now to file it. She filed this months ago. This is just a recent iteration of the filing, and probably would have gotten a lot more mileage in the press if the whole Diddy of it all hadn't blown up. So we are going to keep a close eye on this. It's a little complicated, obviously, because of the court that it's in, because again, there is the guardianship piece involved. But we are definitely going to follow this. I think she had to do it on behalf of her client. It's pretty well done. It's long, it's wordy, but I think it's well done. It is extremely detailed. I think the biggest problem that Ms. Morrissey is going to have in this case. Now, that doesn't mean that the court won't find in her favor, because finding in her favor is really not finding in Ms. Morrissey's favor. It's finding in Wendy's favor, because she's acting on Wendy's behalf, even whether Wendy knows it or not. That is her role. But I think one of the biggest issues that the court is going to have with her, no matter which way they go, is that she allowed this to go on. Now, I don't know if there's really anything she could have done to stop it, given her position at the time, but perhaps she should have been more proactive about getting the matter in front of the judge who was handling the guardianship. And not just her, but Wendy's court-appointed attorney for the purposes of the guardianship as well. I think that when all of this was going on and they were having some concerns about it, instead of them playing round robin with the production company, that they probably should have had this in front of a judge. And I get it, especially if these individuals don't typically deal with the entertainment industry, that they may not see it the way that a lot of us do, in terms of recognizing that this was always meant to be a train wreck. There was never any part of this that had Wendy's best interests at heart, ever. This was all about getting something on television that people were going to watch. Now, would a comeback story about Wendy Williams trying to start a podcast and whatever, would that have garnered some viewership? Possibly. Wendy has a lot of fans. Would it have gotten 6 million viewers? I don't know. Especially if it was just a special and not an ongoing reality show without some train wreck elements to it. Because at the end of the day, that's what sells. And we see what comes on Lifetime and on Annie. We see the reality shows. Okay. Lifetime airs Married at First Sight. So we know what's up. At any rate, I am going to close this episode. So this is part 1 of So You're Playing in My Face, the Wendy Williams case, and of course, more allegations against Sean Combs. So stay tuned for the next episode, which I am going to do right now. And we are going to get into the next set of downright disturbing allegations against Sean Combs. And it's bad. It is it's ugly. Now, whether or not you believe the allegations or not, believe the allegations, that part is up to you. But is there a nasty piece of work that's going on in that case? Absolutely. I'm clicking around a little bit because I am truly getting us ready for for the next episode as I wrap up this one. So stay tuned, everyone. And if you're not going to watch the next one right away or listen to the next one right away, just remember that if you're thinking about it and you want to talk about it, chances are I'm thinking about it and I want to talk about it with you. So let's be honest together. Good night.